Okay, so a much more belated and short stream for today. Basically just looking at the changes that came specifically with bumpers as a result of the changes in Dronapocalypse 2024. So there's new event stuff. I mean, the first week of it's already done since this launched on the 21st, and I'm here streaming this on the 27th, just because it's sort of a continuation of the structural part calculator that I've been working on. I haven't even updated the actual, the public worksheet for a while, to be fair, but it's something where I've been trying to keep on top of the actual personal spreadsheet and my own use of it, and so this is sort of a continuation of that. So in short, they fixed, basically, this is a lot of words to say that basically melee collision and calculations weren't working intuitively before, and now they in theory should. So whether that actually turns out to be the case or not, we'll see. As a result, they significantly changed pretty much all of the stats for all of the melee parts, and they split up melee and RAM damage resistance into two separate components, which is what most of these were doing. So there was even a patch after this where they actually tweaked these values some more, or sorry, the RAM values rather. But this is sort of them doing the opposite of what they did earlier with the Crossout Foxy secrets. I could have sworn there was another update where they made sweeping updates, but I couldn't find the patch notes, and my revision history only goes up to February, so it's possible that there have been more between Foxy's secrets and now, which would be 8 months ago, but I at least don't have them in the history. In any case, around this time they changed the melee damage resistance values for the bumpers specifically. So I've been kind of saying since this time that bumpers should be very good for blocking melee damage, but not gunfire damage, because a lot of the builds nowadays will use bumpers, or especially things like freight train plows, or train plows, the heavier pieces, as just general usage armor, because they just soak up so much damage. They have so much EHP. So if we look at, these are the old values. So if we look at this, for instance, the freight train plow had a melee dura of 4,200 and a bullet dura of 857. There's no other part that even gets close to 857 bullet health. So it's sort of best in slot, even when you're not actually using it in melee, which is what it's supposed to be specifically intended for. So I've been saying they should probably keep or up the durability. So for instance, these were at 90% before, which meant that this is before Foxy's secret. So when you had 90% damage resistance, the effective durability of it was basically multiplied by 10. So in essence, with this update, they halved the durability for these parts against melee, other than the impact, which was 80 to 70, so it was less for that. But for most of the other bumpers, these values were significantly higher beforehand, literally doubled, and then they got reduced for this while maintaining their effectiveness against bullet dura, or of course there's also explosive thermal. Luckily, with all the melee parts, all other damage resistances, damage reductions are consistent, unlike with these structural parts where you have it varying dependent on the faction and the subtype of the part, which gets extremely messy, and was a not insignificant component of my prior stream on Frostbite Assault, where I was comparing these values from before and after the changes. So as far as the bumper specific changes, which are basically what I'm looking at today, the results are basically them backpedaling a little bit on this Foxy secret update by doing all this. So under our old system, the freight train plow would have a melee durability of 4285, which is 8 times its default value because of 5 times the default value, because it reduce damage against melee by 80%. Whereas now, the melee value for it is 3,200 because they went and decreased the melee resistance but increased the ram resistance. So the result being, we can even just look at the values here, it is going to be much tankier against ram damage specifically, but it's actually going to be weaker than before against like grinding melee damage. Likewise, because of how they touched on the other parameters, they did fairly significant changes. Like, this was a huge pain in the ass for me to record all the value changes for, just because there were so many. They touched literally every parameter for most of these. So some of these didn't have any changes. They added a bunch of damage pass through, and like some of them didn't change very much, but most of these changed. So again, I suspect that they put all of these values, the durability and whatnot, onto a like a chart like this, as far as what is a heavy, what is a light, what is a medium, what is its corresponding approximate durability per power square mass volume, and then applied changes at this level to them, rather than going through and tweaking every single value individually. So that's why I hope we got this result. I hope they normalized a bunch of these values, but that means that each part basically would have gotten tweaked fairly significantly based on those for any that weren't on it beforehand, because they would have had unique values, and then anything that would get changed correspondingly to anything else that was running the same values. So for instance, we could actually do a mock-up of this, despite me saying that I could probably do it later. We might as well do it now. So it looks like generally the more DPT you have, the lower your raw durability, which makes sense because it keeps your effective durability lower. And there is corresponding increase in power score as a result of that. Great. Okay, so that is the current subtyping of them. If we go back to our overall comparison for them and their use cases, yeah, still, I mean, bumpers are still number one, but at least it looks like they weaned down the passive melee weapons being as good for it as well. Which makes sense, those will be better for dealing damage. And I mean, you can pretty much see as expected heavier parts. Now that we know, like there are sub-classifications. So for instance, there's a little bit of overlap with very heavy ones of a lighter category just having so much durability they actually push up above some of the other options in the next higher tier category, but they'll probably have worse other ratios for like per mass or whatever. And it looks like a lot less mixing of the different factions, keeping them specific to a couple of ones, which makes sense with them also, like I said, maybe unifying these values a little bit more. So if we also look at the bullet durability, I'm hoping that we see a lot less of these being higher than structural parts, but I guess we'll see. So beforehand, yeah, bumper, parts with damage pass through, bumper, and then it wasn't until the bulbs, which are like the newest structural part, that you actually get some semblance of actually using armor being better than just using more bumpers, whereas now, looks like unfortunately they didn't completely quote-unquote solve that. Like there's a little bit more mixing of them, like the frames being really high, but those are still, sorry, those are literally the exact same places before, but their bullet durability values did go down a little bit. See if I can't get these to be a little more consistent. Oh, that's better at least. So we're looking at the bullet durability, and it doesn't look like in any case they go up. So all of these are being, like, their bullet durability per part is going from, like, the fairly small value difference, you know, like 429 for the snowplow to 426. So that one is probably affected, like, the least. But freight train plow is losing a decent-ish chunk. So overall, it does look like they're decreasing the explicit effectiveness of bumpers against bullets, which is good. Very explicitly something I called out as, like, why is it more beneficial to use a train plow, which is supposed to specifically be against melee damage with all this melee damage resistance. Why is it more valued as armor than a heavy armor part? And it looks like while they didn't completely swap the roles of them, they did help a little bit. We see, yeah, a lot of the bumpers getting bumped down the list, even though the top 10 are basically identical as before. So that means, to at least a certain extent, I'm happy with the results. So yeah, I think from an overall trend, that should be pretty much the video, which is half me poking around with formulas. Anyway. But I'm not so sure there's much more for me to pull out from this. Like, your actual performance is going to vary fairly significantly. In pretty much all cases, it's just been an overall nerf to the parts, which again makes actual armor parts more valuable, as I'd like to think they should be. And, I mean, with all of the changes in, like, mass and stuff, everybody's going to have to rebuild all their shit anyway. So it's not like me being like, oh, the flare only went up by 1. That's a fairly small nerf compared to this one, which went up by 50. Like, it's not going to matter. You're going to have to rebuild everything anyway. That tends to be how it works whenever they completely redo something like this. Which is weird to me, too, because if they actually have these, like, systems for, like, consistently applying the data values, I don't know why they didn't just, like, do a merge row. So put all of these ones together and then say these are all 80. They were 90. But whatever, I don't work for them. No, it would have made me doing the updates a lot easier if they just said, yeah, these are the schemas and these are the parts they apply to, rather than having to manually copy all the values over, but whatever. So there you go. Nerfs all across the board, basically, for the bumpers and passive melee weapons, except for what they're explicitly better at doing, which is ramming things and being rammed, I guess. It's kind of funny because the, like, actual continuous melee value going back up on these, like I said, is basically just a reverse of the Foxy secrets. So not fully, like, going from, like, or sorry, it's actually the opposite way, isn't it? Because these are going lower. Because instead of 90, they were 80. Then they were 80, now they're 70. They're reverting the initial contact via the ram distance. So these are being reverted, in a sense. 90% is literally what the value was before, although it was for all melee. So I guess they felt like chainsaws and stuff were underperforming. Or rather, that they weren't necessarily underperforming so much as they were over-reliant on their initial hit damage, which I suppose makes sense. I'm not. No, we're good. Okay, cool. Then the rest of the stuff is just basically like quality of life. And then like we moved it from RAM, or we moved it from melee everything to melee specific to grinding, but less resistance to ramming. So for instance, ramming the Cerberus or Trax or whatever is going to be more effective than before, because now I guess the damage resistance is specific to the continuous melee. I don't know. And then there isn't really a whole lot of math to do for these because they're just daily challenges. So great. Boom bam. That should be the stream, and hopefully that information is at least somewhat useful. I mean, I'll probably poke around with this some more. Like I said, the structural part calculator spreadsheet hasn't been updated in quite a bit, but that's because they keep just dumping huge system reworks like this, and then me not being 100% sure, not like confident enough to for sure dump it in the public and say it's all good, especially because I think some of these values like the durability and whatnot are, for some of the parts, are still wrong because they ninja tweak them at some point, and I don't really feel like going back through the entire list and checking every single part, because that's what I did when I first made this list. It seems like I'm going to have to do it again, but whatever. This at least covers the structural part changes, methinks. And then likewise I can throw the melee ones over here and theoretically do a comparison to before and after. Kinda depends on how important I feel that is. Yeah, they definitely were not consistent with these RAM values before at all. So I suppose they unified them by quite a bit, and they actually had like, okay, well this is a heavier bumper than this, so we'll give it, you know, damage pass-through instead to differentiate these values a little bit more. Because this is just 3 parts had it, and then brop, all of these are just varying values, with the only things changing being their relevant faction ones, and then the RAM damage bonus, which almost seems fairly nonsensical, which makes sense why they changed it. So this makes sense. This makes a lot more sense. Cool. I'll probably play around with this more and then make a post about it, just like I did with the other one, just saying this is what they were before, this is what they are now, as just a separate image one, so people don't have to go through this hour-long video trying to understand everything that's going on. I can just say, this is the list of bumpers from before. You can see the values were fucking everywhere. This is the list of bumpers now. You can see there's a more clear hierarchy to them. And then likewise with the passive melee weapons, because this is like, yeah, 3 categories. And these are the same 3, but with less crossing, quote unquote, of the different tiers. Which makes sense. Okay, good. Good choice, devs. I don't think people are considering a good choice. I think I've seen quite a few comments of people being quite upsetty with these new values and having to rebuild things again, which like is kind of fair, but also, the fuck is this? Okay. Yeah. So like I can get, like I get the point of it, breaking things sucks, but I think this makes more sense. Yeah, so people are, yeah, they're really upsetty, but I think based off of looking at the actual values of this, like they nerfed pretty much all of the RAM damage bonuses. They increased the durability of bumpers specifically for ramming. So ramming should be way less impactful. And continuous melee also got a buff because the continuous melee damage values got dropped a bit. And their raw values got dropped a bit. So yeah. Looking at these values, I think I'm overall a fan of the change. I have to actually play, the game some more and see like what differences this actually makes in play. But I'm hoping for a lot less of like Cerberus and 3 Lacerator metas everywhere at 9,000, at least. Because if you're nerfing Ram twice, decreasing the damage and increasing the damage resistance, that should be a fairly big impact. Obviously, like start running things like Tusks or Lances or whatnot will probably still have fairly high damage output, but they're hopefully a bit more consistent, and B, less of a ceiling, because beforehand they were really swingy, but if they did hit and they hit well, they'd take out like half a build. So I'm hoping they made them more consistently like mid-range damage, like obviously reward being able to hit somebody, especially head on, now that the angle impacts the amount of damage imparted. But also doing that shouldn't be the difference between like outright killing somebody or crippling their build entirely for the rest of the match, or just bouncing off of them. So yeah, see how it goes.